Okay, I'm going to hope that everybody can hear me. Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us at the 2022 Leadership Symposium. My name is Sierra Gustafson. I am a student here at UFE helping with the planning committee. I'm sure we're all very used to Zoom, but before we get started, I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping points. First and foremost, the keynote address, all 3 workshops, the lunch panel, and the wrap-up session will all be recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, please turn off your camera. However, if you're open to being recorded, please keep your camera on to ensure full engagement and collaboration with your colleagues and presenters. Please mute your microphone. This helps keep background noise to a minimum and making sure you mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Remember that if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A tab. And any questions or concerns relating to Zoom or more general questions, please go see someone at the virtual help desk. This link is located on our Student Leadership Symposium website. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sylvie Murray, who is our newly appointed Dean of Arts and has been making integral contributions at UFE for 27 years. Some of her previous positions include Associate Dean of Arts Faculty and Department Head of History. Dr. Murray has a PhD in history from Yale University and is determined to see UFE move forward in terms of social justice, respect for others, and social change. Her career experience and years of teaching reflects her understanding of student and faculty life here at UFE. Welcome, Sylvie.
Thank you, Sierra. Welcome, everyone. A warm welcome to all of you participants, speakers, guests, organizers, and my best wishes for a Happy New Year. I'm so excited to start 2022 with this event today on an empowering and forward-looking note. More than ever, our world needs inspired and effective and practical leadership that makes a difference and that is sustainable. I'm looking forward to learning from each and every one of you how we provide that to our communities. I wish to acknowledge the territory on which we gather today, the land of the Stalo people, the people of the river. My closest neighbor here today is the Chilliwack, the Chilliwack tribe. Many of you might be closest to the Semeth, the Matqui, the Kwantlen peoples, and other nations in the Fraser River watershed. Acknowledging territory means that we position ourselves in a complex web of relationships, social, political, cultural, and spiritual relationships that have historically changed and continue to inform day-to-day contemporary life. I am myself a white settler from a distant land and just came back from that distant land, so a little bit jet lagged this morning. I continue to learn about this territory I live in and its communities, and I commit myself every day to acting in a spirit of curiosity and humility, as well as gratitude and awe at the richness of the land, the kindness that surrounds me every day, and the diversity and complexity of this territory and its embedded relationships. Now I'd like to turn to Adriana Becas, Dr. Becas, who is head of the history department and one of the early instigators of this now annual event. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. I'm really proud to welcome you all to the 4th annual Student Leadership Symposium. This initiative began back in 2018 when we in the College of Arts saw an opportunity to support and develop student leaders, which is of course one of the core missions of the College of Arts. In January of 2019, we hosted the first symposium centered on the theme of building resilience. We wanted to provide students with the tools for self-care that could help them to prepare to lead others. In January of 2020, the symposium was called Empathy in Action. In 2021, we forefronted the idea of mobilizing hope. And of course, this was at least somewhat in response to all the varied challenges that 2020 brought, and which we thought at the beginning of 2021 were coming to an end. And of course, the hits keep coming, and here we are in 2022 advocating for change. I hope that you can sense that there's a thread that brings all of these symposia together. And I identify that as sort of the combination of compassion and commitment. Compassion for self, compassion for others, and the commitment to self and of self in service to others. So I see those things as a thread that has constantly run through, and I hope will continue to run through these symposia in the future. I just want to make a few thoughts that maybe can get us started and sit with us as we move through the day. The first is, we talked a lot in the organizing committee about getting uncomfortable, putting yourself in a position where you're not necessarily fully at ease, and that's a good thing. We all know that change is hard. And even though we know we must do it, it often takes us to a place we don't want to go. And so it seems rather appropriate, actually, to hold this particular iteration of the symposium at the beginning of January, when we all have those New Year's resolutions that are sort of easy to make and then incredibly difficult to follow through on, in part because it makes us uncomfortable. So I would encourage you to embrace that discomfort, push through those initial obstacles, and get to a place where change is not only an idea, but an achievable reality. The second point I want to make is the connection between personal choice and change. Passion is a key component. It's the fuel that will carry you through the discomfort and will sustain you when times get tough, as they inevitably will. Finally, I think we should be aware of and keep in mind the fear that we all have about how we can effectively work within systems. I think for young people especially, sometimes they're anxious, nervous about how they can actually affect change in places and institutions that are already established, that have their modes of behavior, their principles at work. What can I do as a young person to affect that change? And sometimes you might feel that those systems are so entrenched that it's better just to demolish the system and start anew. And sometimes that's the right move. Sometimes there are places where the system is so unworkable that it needs to go. But in a lot of places, it's about changing from within. It may not be as flashy, but those incremental changes from the inside, both personally and institutionally, may well be the ones that stick and that provide the solid foundation for more further positive change. So I'd like to kind of keep those principles in mind as we go through the day, and maybe just, again, embrace the discomfort that you might feel going through and thinking about these things. Finally, we're really excited to have Melissa Kinzerski, who's with us today to graphically record this event. Graphic recording is the real-time capture of conversations, inspiration, and sharing that takes place in a space. Essentially, all of us will speak, and Melissa will listen and synthesize and draw. She's going to show her progress at the end of the second workshop and then again at the end of the day. The graphic's supposed to represent our collective experiences at this symposium. If something pops out to you that you'd love to have highlighted, or maybe you see something that didn't work, feel free to chat with Melissa during a workshop using the private chat function. And she will try to capture your thoughts as well as we move through the day. So that's what I have to say, and I'm going to pass it back to Sierra at this point. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Adriana. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Michael Prosserman. He is a nonprofit leader, mental health advocate, best-selling author, university instructor, and b-boy, which means breakdancer. That was a new term for me. Who has a passion for scaling high-impact organizations, building well-being into team culture, and fundraising. Speaking from lived experiences and bringing a practical and authentic approach to leadership, Michael will kick off our symposium with the keynote entitled Spark Change. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me here today, Linda, and the entire team at UFV. I'm just so honored to be here. I'd like to extend the land acknowledgement to get started. Just to take a moment to acknowledge that the land that I'm on, I'm actually on the other side of Canada, is called Toronto or Takaranto, which I call home, as a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The city in Toronto also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, which is signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. I just want to acknowledge that Indigenous peoples still suffer from systemic racism established hundreds of years ago, and our need to consistently work towards truth, reconciliation, and healing. And it's something that at my company, Epic Leadership, and me personally, I'm committed to educating myself about this history of mistreatment by settlers, and supporting resilient Indigenous communities to work towards equity. So thank you, and thank you for coming and joining me today. Change is scary, and I thought I would share a little bit about my spark and my inspiration. Sometimes change feels like this. Is that working? I don't know what's going on. Oh, there we go. Woo-hoo! Laughter is fun. So I don't want to make you sick, so I'll turn that off. Sometimes change feels like this. Okay, I'm going to stop. I just always wanted to do that. There's actually no purpose to that except to possibly make you laugh. And if it didn't, then I'm sorry. You're going to hear a lot of dad jokes. And now I'm officially a dad, so it's legit. They are actually called dad jokes. So I'm going to stop telling bad jokes and start my presentation. Here we go. So if you have any questions or ways you'd want to respond, please type them into the Q&A. Whether it's a response or a question, just type whatever you're thinking and feeling into the Q&A. You can type emojis. There's any responses, I'll see them and I can read them out as we go along. So Spark Change today is about how do you make a change in your community. And today I was going to start by talking about what inspired me to start Unity Charity and eventually go on to write this book about the process of building an organization. Before we jump into it, if anyone's interested in seeing me b-boy or break, you can check out my Instagram at @bboypieces, or more about the book, which many people today will have the opportunity to get a copy of through UFV. We'll talk about that a little bit later, how you can get a copy of the book. So finding my spark is in the book, I talk about a 6-step process, starting with the inspiration. And today I'm just going to really dig deep into that inspiration and then jump into some of the other steps that led me to creating this initiative that still exists today without my involvement. And to me, it's a lifelong process. If I can encourage 2 things, it's discovery and self-reflection. Impact is something that doesn't happen overnight. I really truly believe that it's something you discover through trial and error and a whole bunch of self-reflection and being willing to be wrong. So if everyone is willing to be wrong, please raise your hand right now. I don't know if you're actually raising your hand because you're not in an audience, but oh, you can raise your hands. Oh, that's cool. Look at the virtual world raising your hands. That's beautiful. 20 people raising their hands. Now they're putting them down. That's cool. I don't know, up and down, as long as they go up or down. So the willingness to be wrong is scary. It's not easy. And when I was young, this is me. I'll tell you a little bit about my early inspiration. I used to watch TV, Barney, upside down on my head like this. I was saying, "What up, Mom?" as she was taking a picture. She eventually rolled me into gymnastics because she thought I was going to break my neck on the couch. And this led to some of the foundations of breaking, the dance that really inspired me to start this organization, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. But it all started at the ripe age of 5. Another big inspiration to me is my mom. She is the embodiment of resilience. She is a living embodiment of strength, and I love her so much. And I'm just really thankful that I was able, firstly, that she's currently well and with us, and just finds ways to live life to the fullest. This is her and I at the breast cancer run. She is a survivor after undergoing multiple surgeries, as well as a lot of challenging times and chemo and all that stuff. But the other reason, when I was very young, when I was about this age, my mom was struggling with a very serious mental illness, and mental illness has had a huge impact on our family. And when that did happen, I was very young and really didn't know what was going on. Sorry. If we were in person, someone hopefully would be hugging me right now, but I get that we are not here, so I'm hugging you back, and I appreciate that. If that is being extended, the virtual stuff is so weird, but it's been tough, and it's still tough to this day to talk about my mom and the struggles she's been through with her mental health. And I always wanted to do something. Excuse me. I don't usually cry this much. I think I'm just really emotional. I always wanted to do something about mental health in my community because of the challenges that we faced as I grew up. And I very soon became best friends with this brown paper bag because I soon too started to develop. Man, I don't usually get this emotional. I think I'm just emotional in life right now with everything going on, but thank you. This brown paper bag, which became a huge part of my life in high school because I began to develop anxiety, which I later realized was anxiety, but in those early stages, I was just hyperventilating. But what really helped me out and got me on track was these group of young men. These young men are my crew, my breaking crew, maximum efficiency crew. Whenever stuff was going on at home that just didn't make sense and I just couldn't control that feeling, I went to the community center, Seacourt Community Center in East York, and we'd practice, and I just let it all out. I just beat up the floor and let it all out. And these guys became like brothers to me, and they still are to this day, because my crew became like my community, in many ways like a second family. When I got into university in grade 12, I was getting those acceptance and denial letters. I also applied to Cirque du Soleil and got into the circus. And I was deciding between moving to Las Vegas to join Cirque du Soleil or going to York University. And obviously I chose York University. And the reason being is because I really wanted to get some experience and education that I could apply to some of the ideas I had around affecting mental health in a different way than I had seen already, because I felt the system was quite broken, as we spoke about earlier. So my passion for dance and mental health turned into this idea, which was called Unity, which essentially was just a high school class project, which eventually turned into what became my life's mission. And even since then, that's evolved. So why hip hop? Well, I'll show you. You can't really understand it if you don't see it. So why don't I just give you a preview? That was my attempt at doing a virtual performance. Not sure how it went, but there's a first for everything. Ooh. So why? That's why. And I'll show you why. Can you all hear me? Okay. I'm just plugging back in. Yeah, can you hear me? Someone say something if they can't hear me. So why hip hop? Yeah, we good? Hands up. Cool. That's why, because it's one of those things that it's beyond words. And I found with mental health, sometimes you couldn't express it in words. And clearly I couldn't earlier in this talk because I got choked up. But even then, so this is something we really don't understand as society. We only understand a fraction of a fraction. And I realized how powerful hip hop was in my life and how powerful it had been in my crew's life. Hip hop was an engaging tool. It was an accessible tool. It was a community, a platform, a voice. And as you can tell, an outlet. You know, I feel better just getting up and getting down. And this is something I wanted to share with more young people because it had such a positive impact on my life. And it had such a positive impact on my crew's lives in very different ways, as well as in the community and the hip hop scene internationally. And hip hop, actually, breaking is going to be in the Olympics in 2024. So you're going to see a lot more of that. So, sorry, now I'm going to be out of breath for a little bit. By the way, shout out to my dad and my wife who are in the audience right now. We got home a whole bunch of love and extra nervousness that you're here. It's really a joy to have family in the room. And I love you both very much. So I like to focus on building community by doing something I call building the plane while flying it. And really, this is essentially another way of saying learning by doing. As simple as that. And that's exactly how we built Unity, with a bunch of awesome artists who you can see a small portion of the early day artists in this picture, who each one of them, when I look at their face, it brings me a smile, helped co-create a program literally in my basement at my place, at my dad's house, excuse me. And we eventually started calling our meetings back to the basement because that's where all the ideas would come to be. And we'd literally just gather as a bunch of volunteers, a bunch of artists, and say, how can we engage young people into hip hop and use that in a way that can benefit their lives? So we found gaps in the systems, we tested ideas, and we learned and improved again and again and again and again and again, year after year, day after day, week after week. And it kept growing. And one of these things that people always told me, fail fast. You know, they say in business, fail fast so that you can learn quickly. I believe the complete opposite, and I write about that a little bit more in my book. Fail slow, take your time. Community work does not happen overnight. It takes time and patience. And one example that I could use is we developed a leadership program with breaking of a bunch of young people in different high schools who were very good dancers, but we had them get together, very similar to this student leadership symposium, and come up with ideas how they wanted to contribute to their own community. And that group eventually got older and they were no longer youth. So they recruited another generation of youth, and then they got older and they recruited another generation of youth. And after 3 generations, they decided to end the program because they believed it had done the work that it needed to do. And these individuals now were moving on to different places as staff, as artists, as board members in our organization. So it really created future leaders just from this one program. We had many programs, but this was just one as an example of how literally over a decade it took to build this program. And some people from that leadership program still work at Unity today, full-time, part-time, and on contract. So very, very cool to see over 15 years later how this is manifesting over generations. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what that looks like. But I really believe that building community is a practice. It's not like a one-off where you just sort of write an email or make a donation. That is great, and I highly encourage you to start wherever you're at. I also encourage you to continue on that journey and get messy, as we said before, and embrace that uncomfortable feeling of engaging with people on a continuous basis, because it's not easy and you will be wrong. As we said before, who's willing to be wrong? We had at least half the hands up, and I'm sure a few people who didn't know how to put their hands up with the Zoom function were probably putting their hands up in real life. So what's best learned through practice? Riding a bike, maybe dance. Back in the day before they had YouTube, I actually learned how to break, or tried to, through a website called breakdance.com. It was a huge fail. It was all text descriptions of how to learn to break, and it was just impossible to translate. So dance is not something I believe that can be learned in a book. But in hip hop, we have this thing that was created by KRS-One, one of the forefathers of hip hop, called Each One Teach One, where essentially you just learn from one another. If I learned a move, I'll share it with you. If you learn a move, you share it with me. And then we exchange in that way. Wouldn't it be cool if we shared ideas more openly in the world, in both the for-profit, business, and student? Think about research, how people hoard their ideas. If we just shared our research, how better off the world would be. So this Each One Teach One concept can really be applied. Something I talk about a lot, again, I use like sort of hip hop lingo in the book, and when I speak, we use this concept of flip it in hip hop, where you take something that inspires you or that you think you want to try to do, and you flip it into something that makes sense for your context, for your situation, and you make it work for you or for your community. So I really am a big believer that if something is broken, flip it. Don't just accept it for what it is. Challenge the system, challenge the person telling you the rule, and say, hey, what's your goal here? Like, what are you trying to accomplish through this rule that, maybe it doesn't make sense as I read it? And maybe they'll explain it and it'll begin to make sense, but maybe they'll explain it and make even less sense. And that happens a lot in society, I find, with so many different things. So, what's an alternative, or what's a different system? So this is the idea of flipping it. And I really encourage you to think about how can you flip broken systems, and just take a quick moment to pause and reflect. And if you want to type in the chat box, like these pairs of shoes, which are clearly not fitting these toes, these feet, what's a broken system that you think may need to change, and why? It's important to get into the why. If you want to type some of those thoughts into the Q&A, the chat box, please do so. Oh yeah, there we go. I didn't realize the chat box was working. Capitalism, yeah, please provide some wise colonialism, absolutely. The law and the court system that cater to those who can afford the best lawyers, absolutely. Social services. Now, we're talking about big, broad topics here. Stigma around mental illness, absolutely. But the toughest part is to start breaking that apart into manageable chunks where you can actually get working on some of those things. But we have to start with the big issue. So I appreciate all these amazing things. Elementary and high school education system, students are pushed through. Yep. Overrepresentation of Indigenous children in care, absolutely. The way we treat our neighbors, thank you for writing that. And ignore people in the streets. I'm going to talk about that. Actually, you know what? You just read my mind, because that's actually my next point, Caitlin, the way we treat our neighbors. So, oh no, sorry, it's not my next point. It's a point later on, but two systems that I found to be broken, even within the system. So I'm talking about within the nonprofits system here in Toronto or in Ontario. And I find this is a pretty pervasive problem. Nonprofit funder relationships. I find there's this weird power dynamic that if I'm going to the funder, the person who provides me funds, and saying, hey, like, this is what our community is telling us they actually need, or I actually have people from our community in the room at that pitch meeting, your rule around, getting funded every 3 years once, and you got to take a 2-year break, it makes no sense, because our programs don't take a 2-year break. That's an actual example where I pushed back and advocated and said, this doesn't make sense. In that particular case, it didn't work out, and they stopped funding us and got really mad at us. But in other cases, we've had rules get changed because we've advocated. So I really believe that, we had to have a values alignment and push back when things were not appropriate for the community. The other example I wrote there, hip hop legacy organization advocacy, towards my later time at Unity, and we talk about advocacy in this conference. I went to the city of Toronto and noticed that there were 6 pretty well-established 15 to 20-year organizations that do work in the hip hop, using hip hop as a mechanism to create change. Unfortunately, most of these 6 organizations were incredibly underfunded in comparison to the ballet, the opera, et cetera, who get loads and loads of money on a continuous basis from the city, from the government, from the province, from the feds. So I went to the city and said, hey, there's these 6 hip hop organizations that have this much of an impact. And I actually documented that, put it forward to city council with a city staff, and we were able to get almost $1 million over 3 years to these 6 organizations, Unity being one of them. So it really shows that, like, if you see something and this was later on in my time at Unity, where I started to realize that I could advocate even to government. If you see a gap, you can really make a change. And we had a whole team of folks who helped move that forward. I by no means take any credit for it. There were like so many people, but it's amazing to see if you bring that idea forward with the right people in the right context and flip something that's broken, you can make it happen. So change takes community. This is another point, actually furthering what I just said around, we're not looking for more heroes out there. We've seen that fall apart, even here in Canada, in recent examples. I guess you could imagine what I may be talking about, but hero leadership it doesn't work with community impact. And you can only get so far in isolation. We really need to work in relationship with one another. And at Unity, we built a crew of the best youth workers and the best artist educators that I have ever met in my life. And if they had a new young artist who was coming up and really great, we'd get them involved too and train them up through our program and learn from them as well. That learning is reciprocal, because we got to be on the forefront of what was going on in the community, even to this day. Eventually, even after 10 years, we eventually ran a 10-year anniversary artist retreat where the artists would teach each other, because we believe the artists were the geniuses behind the programs and they created the programs. So we had them all teach one another how to be better artist educators. And it was just this beautiful week-long retreat, which I'll never forget. It was unbelievable. And it showed that power of community, almost like the back to the basement, but times 10. We rented out 5 chalets and we got some big money from the federal government. And it was just this amazing, unbelievable dream experience that we got to share together. So I like to add some humor. I'm a big Simpsons fan. I don't know if you are, but if you are, awesome. If you're not, I mean, no judgment. But I like to think of my leadership evolution as something. I really started out as a micromanager, and I used to justify that because I cared so much about the organization. But what I was really doing was disempowering my team. And ultimately that hurt the organization in our early days. I would even check people's emails. I'd get copies of their emails so that I could make sure that nothing fell through the cracks. Like, that's how micromanaging I was. It was way over the top until they had an intervention with me and said, you need to stop checking our emails. I'm like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. And then I began to move down a path of reward and control, or sort of reward and growth. So support their development and reward them for doing a good job. But what I really moved towards, and this was the hardest place to be because people sometimes would take advantage of this, which was trust and empowerment. And I really began to trust in our team to the point in which eventually I used to sit on every single interview. Eventually team members were hiring team members and I wasn't even in the room. And that's when it really became beautiful to see that we had created something beyond an individual, but with a community. Another thing I really challenge and push back and try to flip is this idea of power dynamics in pretty much any situation. We get this a lot in schools. We get this a lot in, teacher-student relationships. We get this a ton in the workforce. I'm your boss and you're my employee. Like, we tried to squish that as much as possible. I mean, there is still an inherent power dynamic, just based on the structure in which we conducted our organization. However, I would constantly challenge that, take out the garbage myself and do the things that, I'd be asking other people to do together, so that I wasn't, an autocratic or top-down leader. And I believe this can be done in the smallest of ways that makes a really big difference. So I encourage you to, if you have a quick thought on how do you show up on a team, what are some characteristics or things that you notice when you show up on a team? Do you get really quiet? Do you start talking a lot? Do you sort of, ask for instruction? Do you want to do things your way? How do you show up on a team? Do you try to empower others on your team, lead by example? Yes, absolutely. And it's one of the hardest things to do because it's a constant challenge, because every time you show up, you're leading by example, right? And sometimes that's, it's not perfect. And I've definitely had moments where I've done things that I'm not proud of, but, ask from input. Yeah, my team used to sometimes hate me because they'd say, I'd always say, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And it got to the point where it's just like, Mikey, make a decision. And forgiveness. Yeah, we need a lot of forgiveness, especially nowadays with all the stuff happening in the world. Yes, inclusivity of every voice, which is hard to do. You don't know what you don't know about who's not included, which we're going to talk a little bit about later. It's actually perfect timing for that point because when we worked at Unity, I would relate how we got along with one another and took risks together towards what's called a cipher in hip hop. And for those of you who are not familiar with what a cipher is like a circle. It can be a dance circle, it can be a rap circle, it can be like MCs can get together and start beatboxing and MCing in the circle. Essentially, it's a space where people get together to share something. And in this particular case, you see this young man stepping out into the audience, taking a big risk, a huge risk. People could laugh at him, but they don't, because in hip hop, the cipher is a I don't want to say a safe space because that word can, I'd call it a brave space in which people can take chances and be celebrated for who they are. In hip hop, sometimes, we have different names on pieces. It's almost like an alter ego. You can step out of who you usually are and reestablish yourself. And just by throwing down a cool move in the middle of the dance floor. So I encourage you, I found this metaphor to be an interesting one, to think about how can you bring ciphers into other spaces in the workforce, in, student projects, in community work that you're doing, where you celebrate bravery, you highlight people's strengths, even if they're strengths that you don't normally see of them. Let them surprise you or surprise people with your strengths. Challenge blind spots. You can call people out in the cipher and battle them and just be like, hey, I think you're pretty weak at that, and I want to call you out and challenge you, and we can have a conversation in the cipher without saying that out loud, which could have sounded offensive. Create a vibe, like by showing up and being present, your energy can really bounce off of other people, and push your limits, like go past those limits. Oftentimes I'll do things in the cipher that I could never do, alone in my basement, because there's just a conversation happening. I'll give a quick example. Kat, one of our employees, showed up to Toronto from Montreal, just completed school in community arts at York. And she said, I really want to work with Unity. I don't know how, but I've been following the organization for many years. And I'm like, okay, well, prove it. So I gave her probably the most important job at our annual festival. We have a festival every year that used to happen at Dundas Square, a big public venue in Toronto. I said, prove it. Drive the truck, which is the most important thing, because if that truck doesn't show up, then 100 volunteers are sitting there doing nothing. So I drive this huge truck to the festival, because that would prove that you really are serious about this. She had no interest in driving trucks, but she said, you know what, I'm down, I'll do it. She drove the truck. She was there early every day. She went as far as going back to Montreal because her dad has a profession where he drives trucks occasionally, and she went with him to learn to drive the truck in reverse around pylons. Like, I didn't even know about this till years later, but it just shows that like you can really get the best out of people when you challenge them and in a respectful way. And Kat still works at Unity, I think 6-7 years later, which is amazing. And this is the vibe. This is the cipher of our crew that we established over the years. This is actually my last day at Unity, the big group hug that I'll never forget. So we took this thing from one high school, which was my high school back when I was in high school, to reaching 250,000 young people across Canada in over 70 schools with 80 paid staff and a $1.4 million operating budget. We grew this thing, blew this thing out of the water, and to the point it was way bigger than any one of us or any of the communities we were specifically working with. We went from having no partners to many, many partners who supported our work. And we didn't know at all what we were doing, but we leaned into being very resourceful. And that to me is the essence of hip hop, or as they call it in hip hop, creating something out of nothing. We were youth. we were going from high school to high school. Principals were like, do you go to this school? I'm like, nope. And we were bringing our programs to different schools and eventually different communities. And we would eventually hire local artists from those communities and train them and work with them. But we asked for help, which is a huge thing, and it's super difficult to do. We looked for mentors anywhere we could get them. We grew at work, and we took one tiny step at a time. And it led to incredible things like, getting Unity promotions for free up on billboards. We had a free TV commercial that was airing across Canada, promoting our work, getting more young people engaged in our programs. We even eventually were able to get major headliners to come to our festival, like Jizza from the Wu-Tang, Talib Kweli, and even Biz Markie, rest in peace, at the biggest venue in this entire city. And the young people from our programs were able to share the stage with these amazing artists, which would, in many ways change their career or put them onto a career in the arts. So asking for help, I'll just quickly tell this story and maybe tell one more if I have time to push 2 more minutes. This man here, I saw him speak at an event. He's a lot of experience in sponsorship. And I said, can we grab a coffee? And he said, yes. And I asked him and he helped me just develop a sponsorship strategy for Unity. And eventually he got me to speak at one of his conferences. And at that event, the Governor General's wife was, or the Governor General was speaking. And then a few days before the conference, I got a call from Canada. I'm like, you should probably take this. And it was the Governor General's wife. And eventually they came and visited the program and loved it and became patrons and advocates as deep supporters of mental health through the work that they did. So it took us to many new stages and to many new places just from asking for help from one person. I'm still in touch with Mark to this day, who's just an amazing person. We have a huge roster of mentors that we literally just reached out to on LinkedIn, or if we saw them speak in an event, we'd be like, hey, can we grab a coffee or just talk? And half the time people would say yes, but half the time they'd say no, but that's a pretty good success rate, even if we get a few new mentors. I want to end on this point here, which is, how can I be effective in leadership if I don't take care of myself? This is so important and something I neglected for many years of my life, like this cat looking at themselves in the mirror, just being like, what's going on here? This is a moment I really had to look at myself in the mirror. This is my email inbox. I sent 426,000 emails over 10 years. That averages out to about 160 emails a day. But I was also having 5-10 meetings a day across the city, driving around. It was completely unsustainable. And my dad, who's here on our 10-year anniversary for Unity, was undergoing a pretty serious surgery. He lives with Parkinson's, and it's had a huge impact on our family as well in my later years of life. And he's just the most positive inspiration. If you met my dad, he's like everyone's mentor and best friend. He's just like full of life, and Parkinson's really took a lot from him at that particular time when he got this surgery. And everything, the emails, this situation, all kind of came crashing down at the same time. And 4 to 6 months later, I developed some very serious anxiety where I couldn't wake up. I couldn't stop crying. I just couldn't go to work. And I was really, really struggling. And for the first time, I had then developed a mental illness that I was now living with, that I had to learn to navigate while running an organization. And I decided to tell our board, and then eventually decided to lead by example and tell our staff. And eventually, which I did not have to do, and I don't encourage you to do this, but I felt the need to really open this up as a conversation in the organization. And it was really a beautiful moment where there were a lot of tears shed, and other people were able to come out about their struggles as well. And we, brought in new benefits and all sorts of things to support not only my mental health, but the mental health of the team. And then I realized I needed to go. When you start something and it grows, and you feel so much in love with this thing, sometimes it's not forever. And as this man here, one of my crewmates who still works at Unity today, who's continuing to take on more leadership roles, you have to step back. And I decided to step back, and so others could step forward, and many people did step forward when I stepped back. So knowing when is the right time for you to step back, so that you can really take care of yourself, but also let go. And this is something I really wanted to do. So after 15 years, I decided to leave. I wanted to empower the staff, diversify our funding, pay livable wages, which is really hard to do in the nonprofit sector. And I encourage anyone and everyone to be doing that if you're in a position where you're offering employment, and let go and get out of the way. And I haven't been involved for 3 years at Unity, and they are thriving under the leadership of Rebecca Harrison, who's the new executive director, and all the amazing staff and artists who are still there. Then I got a puppy because I had a huge hole in my life in terms of emotional and social connection. My wife and I got married, my beautiful wife, Melissa, and I got married, and I started a new business, Epic Leadership, which is what I come here and I wrote this book to share with you today. And I began building the plane while flying it all over again. And that's the end of the loop, which is respark or reignite, because it's a continuous lifelong cycle of learning. And I'm still learning to this day. And I'll tell you one thing, this is my son. I love my son more than anything in the world. He was born in September, and it's my newest challenge in life. You know, I thought running an organization and having an impact through the community was difficult. Man, this has been the biggest challenge of my life, just supporting this young man to just live a beautiful life. And it's only been 4 months. So, you know, literally we don't sleep at all. So I'll end on this before we get into the Q&A. Find your spark, flip broken systems, and discover your impact, even in the smallest of ways on a day-to-day basis. So thank you for having me again. If you are interested in how we did it, we are running a workshop. I'm running a workshop this afternoon or here this evening on the build step on discovering impact. And please, you know, if you're interested in hearing more about the story, check out the book. And feel free to follow on social media. Would love to stay in touch with anyone out there who's building a project or even just has an idea. And if you're joining the workshop this afternoon, we're going to do what's called a design sprint. So we're going to actually test out designing a program idea within an hour, which will be optimistic, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope you can join us then. Thank you again for having me. Peace, love, unity.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was fantastic. I do notice that we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for that. We're on a bit of a tighter schedule. However, for those of you who ask questions, we'll make note of those, and perhaps there will be time for that during Mike's workshop later, or we'll find another avenue to address those. Before I send you all for a break, I just want to draw your attention briefly to our Mask for Change activity. Most of you should have received a little packet in the mail, and it contained a white mask. Unfortunately, because of flooding and postal issues, we were not able to give one to all of you. So if you don't have one, perhaps find a piece of paper or another mask that you already have. But we are going to decorate those together as a textile activity, and maybe relate it to some of the things that are talking about today, so we can wear inspiration on our faces, all of those wonderful things. But for right now, we are going to send you all on a short break to make time to prepare for your next activity. So please be ready to sign in for your next workshop at 10:30. And if you have any questions, please visit the link at the help desk. Thank you, everybody.